Hello and welcome. I'm Carol Cram, host of the Art and Fiction podcast. This episode features Linda Moore, author of Attribution and 5 Days in Bogotà. Linda Moore is an author, traveler, and a recovering gallery owner. She studied art history at the Prado while a student at Complutense University of Madrid and received degrees from the University of California and Stanford University. Welcome to the Art and Fiction podcast, Linda.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you for inviting me.
I've read your new novel, 5 Days in Bogotà, and your debut novel, Attribution. Both are focused on art, but in two very different ways. So let's start with 5 Days in Bogotà, which is your new one. What a ride. Tell us why you chose to set this novel at an art fair in Colombia in the 1990s, I believe it is.
Right, early 90s. I used to own an art gallery for many years, and we specialized in art from the southern cone of South America, but almost all Hispanic, Latino, and Latin American regions, including California. So I did art fairs in a variety of places, and I actually went to an art fair in 1991 in Bogota. And I was surprised when I got there about how uh, tense and dangerous the environment, the atmosphere was. And it stuck in my memory. So as I thought about writing the next book, Attribution was very much about the academic world of attributing paintings. And in particular, that book focused on a Baroque painting from about 400 years ago. And this, fast forward, goes to contemporary art, artists making art now, and galleries and dealers and auction houses trying to work in that world, sell art, and market their artists' careers.
But so tell us about your experience as an art collector and a gallery owner and how that informed how you wrote this novel.
Well, there were a lot of parts of it which were very easy for me to draw from memory because I had done many art fairs all over the world, Buenos Aires, Madrid, Bogota, Chicago, Los Angeles, closer to home in California where I live, and where the gallery was. But I also had to do a lot of research. I pride myself on that in my novels, that I think the readers expect it to be correct. So something as small as what color were taxis in 1990 in Bogota is something I work hard at and making certain that the streets are correct. I study Google Maps, all kinds of things. So it takes a lot of work, even though the milieu of an art fair was very familiar to me.
Yes.
And I was also familiar with selling art at auctions and how collectors view those things and how dealers interact with artists and with collectors. So those parts came fairly easy for me, but the political scene and a lot of the other details were farther afield from my world, although not completely, because my first career was in Latin American politics.
Oh,
I have a master's degree in that from Stanford. And while I was writing my master's thesis on Chile, was very close to the time when Allende was, depending on who you ask, assassinated uh, or he committed suicide. So those parts were easy to revisit for me, but I also did a lot of fact checking to make sure I got things right.
yes, you talk quite a lot in the novel, and I don't want to spoil anything about the US government's involvement in Colombia. Now, that was in the early 1990s. Have things changed in Colombia? I know nothing about Colombia.
Well, and most people don't. I think that was one of my motives for writing the book. Not only do people aren't familiar with the fantastic art that is being created in Latin America, They also are not that familiar with Latin America. They're much more familiar with Europe, which is funny because personally, I think we have a lot more in common as a nation with those countries in Latin America. We all, had native populations, went to the colonial periods where there was basically an occupation of the countries by a European power, and then, struggled to find independence and so on. So there's a lot that we have in common. I am not the best person to ask about the current situation in Colombia. I will tell you this. There were so many groups that were involved in the difficulties and the violence of the 1990s that I'm really clear about one thing, and that is there were no good guys.
Yeah,
There were
I kind of
some
got that
bad guys.
impression.
But nobody, it's not black and white. Nobody could stand back and say that their hands were completely clean of some of the difficulties that were created. One of the groups that existed during that time was called the FARC. It was a group of rebels, communist rebels, who wanted to seize power and take over the government. Of course, our government has always gotten involved and opposed those type of groups, whether you talk about Cuba or Chile or wherever. And so one of the things that happened was very similar to what happened in Ireland, for example, where people are trying to figure out, in many other places in the world, where a country is trying to get beyond the terrible and deep resentments and hatred for one group over another because so many people were killed and lost. And Colombia had a commission which got together and met and tried to forgive the other side and move on and move forward with their country. And it was somewhat successful. I think they've slid back a little bit. That was around 2015 or so. And I'm not sure where it stands exactly now, but I do admire the effort to try to move forward. And I have heard from a lot of people in Colombia about the desire to be seen as something more balanced than just the narco state that we
Yeah.
constantly get a heavy diet of. So for me, it was a joy to write about artists trying to make their art, different families struggling with all the same struggles that we have
Yes.
here, and how much we really have in common with people. And also little things like most people don't know Bogota is bigger than New York City
I did not know that.
and
Really?
almost as large as Los Angeles.
Wow.
Colombia has 51 million people. At least that was the last number I saw. And California has 40 some million.
Yes. Well, so does Canada, about 35 million. So yeah, it's
So
bigger than us.
imagine Colombia is a force. It's an
Yes.
important country with a huge economic base of oil deposits and, of course, coffee. We all know
Yeah.
about that. And a lot of other mineral resources that make it actually a wealthy country in terms of a lot of other places in the world.
Interesting. Yeah, no, and I enjoyed a lot reading about Colombia. I've never read a novel set in Colombia, so this was a first for me.
Oh, I
Aligned with
think
the
that
art.
I'm going to disagree. I bet you've read 100 Years of Solitude.
Actually, I was just going to mention Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and I will admit that no, I have not read it. I think I
Oh,
might own it somewhere, but I never did read it. I
oh,
know
well,
it's
you
terrible.
have a
And now
joy.
I'm inspired.
Yeah,
Yes.
you have a joy waiting for you. And, you've no doubt seen the movie Love in the Time of Cholera. That was all set in Colombia as well. And I think you probably know more about Colombia than you realize. So,
I'm not sure about that. And but anyway, it has certainly inspired me. So tell me about Gabriel Garcia Marquez, why you included him. He has a role in the novel, which was that was a wonderful scene, by the way.
Thank you. When I was planning to go to this art fair in Bogota, I had never been to Bogota either. The first time I went there in 1991. And I wrote a letter to the American consul, cultural attache in Bogota. And I asked them to invite Garcia Marquez because I was bringing the artworks of an artist, De Los McGraw, who does all his works inspired and informed by literature. I mean,
Mhm.
everyone from Millos to some poet laureates and Alice in Wonderland. And he did a series on 100 Years of Solitude. So I always tried when I brought art to an art fair in a different country to bring something that the country would connect with. So it was obvious to choose that. And I wrote this letter and asked them to invite Garcia Marquez, and the reply came back. I mean, it's sort of a bizarre thing to do. I was just, putting caution to the wind and saying, oh, why not, invite him.
Yeah.
And of course, he, already had a huge international reputation as a Nobel Prize winner, and his books were well known throughout the world. So I got a letter back that said, Mr. Garcia Marquez apologizes. He is unable to attend the art fair. He will be entertaining 11 presidents from Latin America, along with Colombian President Gaviria. And I thought, oh, well, I guess that does sound more important than coming to see my booth at the art fair. So I'm at the art fair and I get this notice to go to the office and get a message. This is before cell phones or computers or any of
Mhm.
that. And so the message was from the cultural attaché saying, Mr. Garcia Marquez wants you to know he is coming to the art fair with President Gaviria to,
Wow.
see this first ever art fair in Bogota. So I'm in a panic. I called the artist and he told me, oh, you have to give him one of the paintings. I go, which painting? And he said, oh, you'll know, you'll know. I'm like, oh my goodness. Okay. I think he was just thrilled with the idea that Garcia Marquez might have, one of his works in his collection. So anyway, Garcia Marquez comes and he's completely charming. And I, put a big author's note in the back of the book about how much of this was true. I do have
Yes.
a few words from that chapter if you'd like me to read them, if this is a good time to read them. Um,
Yes,
and
let's do it right now because I did want you to do a reading and you had mentioned you were going to read that scene. So that would be
And
great.
I'm not going
Thank
to
you.
read the whole scene, but
No.
anyway, I'm just at the point in the scene where I give him this little encaustic box that the artist has made that has a picture of the canal and the in the town of Macondo. So Garcia Marquez responds to me, how generous. Thank you. What a pleasure. He looked closely at the work and then at her. I want to give you a gift too. When do you leave? He looked to one of his assistants waiting at the edge of the booth, holding back a whole group of fans following him. Being close to him brought national pride and wisdom, hope to people of all stations. She regrouped to respond, Sunday. We leave late Sunday. Marquez motioned to the assistant and asked her to gather Allison's contact information. Allie had another thought and asked, perhaps a simple thing you could do. It would be a great gift for me. I've heard you don't sign autographs. May I ask you anyway, would you sign this old copy of 100 Years of Solitude? She'd brought this Spanish version in case someone asked her a question about the translated lines in McGraw's paintings. He took the tattered book with the coffee stains on the cover from her student days into his hands. Marquez turned it over again and again, his eyes filled with emotion. Where did you get this? Was he offended by her careless treatment of his famous book bought over 20 years ago? Madrid, 1967. I was a student at the university there. She shifted from one foot to another while he examined the book, even reading the copy page. Finally, he spoke. This is a very special edition, printed by Editorial Sudamericana in Buenos Aires. Political issues with Cuba, my friend Fidel, dominated the news and my life, kept me out of the United States for years. When the print run was shipped from Buenos Aires to Colombia, the Colombian government impounded all the books and, that sad look returned, destroyed the entire shipment. She gasped and stayed silent, considering the loss of precious books, this masterwork. The idea that any books, however famous, well-written or not, could be destroyed disgusted her. He spoke in a quiet voice, absent the rage she felt. Some copies got out of Argentina, mostly to Madrid. This is the first time I have held this paperback edition in my hands in many years. Can you imagine my joy to learn it survived and made this journey back to Colombia? He lifted his reading glasses off his forehead, stowed them in his jacket pocket, and focused on his eyes on hers. You've made me happy twice in a few minutes. He smiled and searched his other pocket for a pen, which his assistant produced like handing an instrument to a surgeon. Marquez, a writer without a pen. That was something she'd remember.
Thank you so much. I just love that scene. That's a wonderful scene. It's wonderful to know that that actually happened. Is that correct? Yay, there it is.
And here's
Oh,
the
probably.
autograph.
Oh my goodness.
And he signed it, Gabriel. I love that. That's in the scene too. But the scene really did happen. He has another bigger role in the book too. But
Yes.
that actually did happen, as I have said to a number of people. I
Yeah.
told my husband, if the house catches fire, forget the wedding photos, the grandkids
Get the
photos,
book.
get the book.
Yeah, well that is quite the treasure to have. Wow. Thank you for sharing that with us. I also wanted to ask about, central to the novel is the discovery of these two paintings that are worth millions. Now, are those fictional?
They are.
Yeah.
Uh, there were at that time, and still there are Colombian artists, contemporary artists, whose works do fetch that kind of money. We can talk more about the art, but this is fictional. These are paintings that kind of the artist plays with some iconic images of very thin people with big feet. And
Mm.
so I picked something that wasn't like any artist I knew. Probably some artist will come out of the woodwork and say, oh, that's my work, but I don't know that artist. But it made it easy to talk about what these paintings were. And of course, they are part of a conspiracy, a scheme. And
Mhm.
this scheme is not uncommon, honestly, is one reason why I'm not a fan of contemporary art being sold at auction is what happens is dealers or collectors or even artists themselves can put a piece in the auction and get people to competitively bid for it. um, Sometimes a dealer has to step in and protect their artist's work in case nobody bids on it.
Yes.
It's a roller coaster in the auction world. And many times dealers will work hard at, when you hear the newest, latest, and greatest artists and fetching all these high prices, I always stand back and wait and watch, because it is my experience that sometimes it's just a bubble that's going to break and isn't a real market, that they're working at creating a market. So all those
Yes.
shenanigans are not special to Colombia. They happen throughout the world.
Yes, well, I know that's what I found very interesting because I know a little bit about the art world, and so that was a lot of fun to read about. So, are you still involved with the art world, Linda?
As a collector, and it's been, least a decade since
Yeah.
I've actually been selling art. I got very involved as a trustee in a number of museums, including the San Diego Museum of Art. And I think it's probably important that people who are in those roles are not also dealing in the art market. It presents a
Yes.
conflict. So
Oh, I've heard about that. Yes.
not that the conflicts go away, but I personally did not want to be in that situation. And I spend more time, trying to help booster all of these art institutions that do struggle to have enough funds to run their operations and continue showing us art. It's sort of like independent bookstores. I now feel, and as a writer, I now feel a certain obligation to try to nudge people towards purchasing books at bookstores. And I spend a lot of my time going around and doing book events, book signings, and trying to nudge people to purchase the book at bookstores.
Definitely, we want to support our independent bookstores. So this also leads me to ask you, you've come to novel writing a little later in your life, kind of
Right.
like myself. I had a long career before I started novel writing. So why did you start writing novels?
Well, my children had graduated college. I had a friend who had written, edited a memoir for some refugees that was very interesting. And she invited me to join a read and critique group. So I was a big reader, but I had never aspired to write novels. I had written a lot of artist
Yeah,
catalogs. I published chapters in art anthologies and other books and articles in journals, but I had never written fiction. So I wrote a novel in that read and critique group. You stay in long enough, eventually you finish the novel. And I submitted it to a contest. And not only did I not win, I got ruthless criticism. So, for which I actually thank those judges
yeah.
because it made me realize I did not know how to write fiction. So I applied to Stanford's novel writing program and shockingly got in. And I spent 2 years learning how to write a novel. And the program's unique because you actually do have to write a novel to complete the program. And that's unusual. Most MFA programs, you're writing short stories or novellas or
Mm.
something else because the structure of the academic program doesn't allow the time it takes to write a
Yeah,
novel.
it takes a long time.
So this is more of a program that you can flexibly finish when you finish the novel, but you can't finish the program without the completed novel. And
Mm.
that's also a gift because I'm here and something like 90% of novels started and are never finished. So
Yes,
I guess that's good news because we're in the final 10% here, Carol.
I know. Isn't it amazing? I know. I do like to remind myself of that when I get down. But I wanted to ask that 5 Days in Bogota is a thriller. So what is it about writing thrillers that appeals to you?
Well, it started out more to be suspense, but then I realized that this decision she makes to leave her two children who've recently lost their father and her
Yeah.
husband um, with the housekeeper because she hasn't got a relative that's easy. She's so desperate to earn money, and she's trying to figure out a quick way to do it. And I thought, well, she needs to be able to feel that fear of something, and that kind of transitioned it into a thriller. But I call it a thriller light because it's very much literary. It's very much the character's journey, formation. And typically, thrillers are more plot oriented than character oriented. They also have, I was stunned to learn, every scene is a chapter. Did you know that? I did not. And, but as I was writing it, someone mentioned that to me. And one day I was signing Attribution at one of those, bookstores that has books all around, and it was a quiet moment. I started looking through Clancy and Patterson and, Silva, and a lot of these people are well known for their thrillers. And I learned, yes, they have like 75 chapters.
Mhm.
And I thought to myself, I don't think I can write like that
Yeah.
because I take so much trouble to put you in the scene when a chapter begins and, know, ground you where you are and what the narrator is seeing, you're seeing. And just jumping around like that didn't feel right to me. So I
Yeah.
stuck with my 30 something chapters and multiple scenes in a chapter. No one's really complained. One person who helped me edit the books, I asked them what genre they thought it was, and their answer I love. They said, you know, genres are for librarians and booksellers who need to find a shelf to put this on.
That's true.
And that's not the author's worry. So I kind of don't worry too much about it, but I think most readers will find it an exciting page turning ride. At least that's what they've been telling me. So
Well, it is, but it's got more to it than just a typical thriller, which I think is why it's so much fun to read. I think because of all of the stuff about the art and Colombia and everything, and it's not just fast-paced, guns and that kind of thing. There's a tiny bit of that, but really, it's not. You're right. It's about Allie's journey, and we're really rooting for her all the way through.
and somebody said to me, it's like, yes, well, there are thrillers that have, single, mostly attractive young women. We don't have many thrillers where you've got a mom of two who's
Yeah,
got to try to, get herself out of a very difficult situation and live to tell the tale. So I had a couple people comment on the fact that they like that it was a mom
yeah,
who had this challenge. I also really hope that when people read my books, they are entertained, of course.
mhm,
That's the
of
first
course.
goal. But also that they come away and they learn something. It's very
Yeah,
gratifying to me when I meet with book clubs or give talks that people will say to me, I didn't know this or that, and that I found that really interesting. And I think it's kind of a painless way to learn something,
yeah.
if only the geography of, of South America.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. I know. I love that when people say, "Oh, I never knew all that about painting," because my first novel is about a painter, right? I wanted to talk about Attribution, which is set in Spain. So this is based on your background as an art historian. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this novel?
Yes, actually, I'm not an art historian. I've taken a lot of art history classes, but I have never written or worked as an art historian.
Oh, okay.
I love it though. I lived in Madrid. I took art
Yeah.
history in the Prado, and I know something about it. But Baroque art was not my field, and
Yeah.
I needed to work at doing a lot of research. And frankly, I loved it. If I never published a book, if I just like go down those rabbit holes and reading about that particular time in the history of Spain, the golden age of art. I just found that so enjoyable for myself to learn. But the inspiration of that book came from a lecture I went to at the San Diego Museum of Art. I was a trustee, and this was a young curator who was talking about a painting he had attributed and the challenges. I was riveted because it talks about the science, the chemistry, the x-rays, the
Oh,
linen
yes.
fibers, the pigments, uh, plus the eye, the important aesthetic ability to look at a work and know enough about the artists of the time to be able to say it is or it isn't. It's like, oh, well, that person always had a fleck of white in the eyes of his portraits, and this does not have that fleck of white. Therefore, we're rolling it out, right? And beyond that, the other things, the history of the provenance and what other documentation can you find, or sales records, or somebody commissioned this. So you're in libraries digging through, documents that, are hundreds and hundreds of years old. And then after you get to a certain place, then you have to deal with the titans of the art world who may have already declared this painting something else. There's Velázquez in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City that has been a Velázquez, has not been a Velázquez,
Oh,
has been a Velázquez, back, I think at least 5 times.
wow.
And a good friend of mine teaches art history at the New York University. And he told me he was asked to write a paper on that painting. We were standing in front of it at a recent show that they did on Juan de Pareja, who was Velázquez's slave, later was emancipated, and they had that document actually from Italy where he'd emancipated him in the show. And I had only seen a few of his works, but he became quite a good artist on his own.
Mm.
And this painting was in the show, and we were standing there looking at it. And I said, and now it's a Velázquez, right? And he had to write the paper about why it wasn't a Velázquez. I said, well, what made the difference? He said, well, they cleaned it, and there were these nuances in the pigments and shadows of the tunic. And I'm like, oh, come on, that's so subtle. Can't hardly even see it. But it's interesting how things change over time. When people walk in museums, they think, oh, those labels on the wall, they're like the gospel, right?
Yeah, right. They're
Actually, not
not.
true. And it's also very common. Like right now, the Prado's all happy that they have just declared this Caravaggio that someone put in auction for $1,000, more or less, and a family that had had it forever. And the government of Spain was alerted, and they stopped the sale and gave the work to the Prado to do
Yeah.
scientific testing and declared it was a Caravaggio. It's on display if anybody is in Madrid this summer. And the owner sold it for $32 million to. So y'all go to auctions and look for those treasures. Who
You never
knows?
know. Yeah. So, one of my goals with the Art and Fiction podcast is to inspire other authors. So, what's one thing you've learned from writing your novels that you didn't know before?
Well, I guess I did not realize how important the details were. As a reader, you just sort of, absorb them and don't pay attention. But when you're writing, there are many times where I'd be writing something like, oh, around the corner from the hotel was this or that. Restaurant or something. And then I think, oh, I can't write that if
Yeah.
what's next to the hotel is a big freeway. So I would get online and I'd research, and it's part of the reason that it takes a long time to write a good book is you just don't make assumptions about almost anything. And that I was not aware of.
Yeah.
Uh, but there were a lot of things that I think come from other parts of your life that when you're writing a book, for example, perseverance is everything. Uh,
Yes.
Discipline, work ethic. I mean, what field can you even think of where those qualities are not important? And they're especially important in a writer because you will go a long time before you will get a lot of positive praise.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people talking in your ear saying, oh, this isn't good, or,
Yeah,
give,
right.
and your self-talk. So I remember the first sort of writer's retreat I went to, I went with that friend. And I was so proud of what I was presenting, a couple chapters. And I got, a lot of criticism. And I sort of bit my lip and went back to my room
Mm.
and sat there, and I was in tears. And my friend
Yes.
came to find me and she said, "So did you come for praise?" And I thought, what a great question. No, the only way to
Yeah.
get better is to have especially gratuitous praise, which is what
Yes.
your family and your friends will give you.
Yeah, sure they will, but
You wanna get better, you have to get a tough skin, and you
yes.
have to take what people are saying to you, particularly if multiple people are saying the same thing, and work at improving and solving those problems with your work. It is astonishing to me when I look back at what I was writing 15, 20 years ago and what I write now,
Mhm.
and I I marvel at how far I've come, and how much I've learned, but embrace the learning. Your
Yes.
best friends are the ones that give you the tough feedback.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm very fortunate. I have a friend who does that. She reads what I write and she doesn't hold back, which is great. Yeah. Sometimes it's hard, but I am grateful to have that because yeah, you have to be willing to put yourself out a little bit and take criticism because that's how you're going to get better, right? Which is really our
And
goal.
and there are times when I have actually said to someone who says, "Oh, I think it's terrific," and they're a
Yeah.
writer, right? And I'll say back to them, "No, no, no, dig deeper, find where it can be better, because I'm unsettled about it being
Mhm.
finished. I need it. I need more ideas."
Yeah, exactly. So, and that's worth gold when someone will actually tell you. Well, thank you so much, Linda, for chatting with me. This has been just wonderful.
My pleasure, Carol. Let's stay in touch. And if you have any questions or your listeners do, please reach out to me at lindamoreauthor.com is my website. And if you hit the contact, those emails come right to me. So I'm happy to
Right.
have those.
Yes, and her link will be in the show notes. I've been speaking with Linda Moore, author of Attribution and 5 Days in Bogotá, listed in the visual arts category on Art and Fiction at www.artandfiction.com. Be sure to check the show notes for a link to Linda's website at www.lindamoreauthor.com. You'll also find a link to a 20% discount on a subscription to Pro Writing Aid, fantastic editing tool for writers. If you are enjoying the Art and Fiction podcast, please help us keep the lights on by donating a coffee on the Ko-fi website. The link is in the show notes. Also, please follow Art and Fiction on Facebook and Twitter, and don't forget to give the Art and Fiction podcast a positive review or rating wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much for listening.